I don't know what I would do if my boyfriend told me I was being too nice to his niece and nephew. I would have to kill him. Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, Hannah Needs to Yell. And today I need to yell about the American justice system, specifically the criminal justice system, specifically the Karen Read retrial, which I honestly can't believe is about to happen. For those of you who have been following my channel for a while now, about this time last year, I was talking about the Karen Read trial back when I was in an era where I was trying like live streams only. There's like this whole secret sub era of my channel that only those people who were available for those like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. live streams that I did are privy to. So if you really want to go see some unfiltered me from a year ago, still dealing with insomnia, but just not saying it, check it out. But yeah, back in the spring of last year, 2024, I talked a couple of times about the trial of Karen Read, the woman who has been accused of either murdering or accidentally killing her boyfriend at the time, a Boston police officer named John O'Keefe, by hitting him with her SUV out in front of 34 Fairview Road, a house that they were going to after a night of drinking with some friends. All the friends went to 34 Fairview Road to have an after party, basically, and then leaving him there to die in the cold as a blizzard was coming into town. This supposedly took place overnight from January 28th to 29th, 2022 in Canton, Massachusetts, which is basically a suburb of Boston. I think everyone needs to pay attention to this case. I know that I do a bunch of influencer commentary on this channel, but let's be real. A lot of my commentary discusses influencers who are accused of crimes, who are allegedly accused of criminal activity, whether or not they are being taken to court, whether or not they end up going through the entire trial process and being convicted and all of that. My heart yearns for justice. My heart yearns for people to stop being awful to each other. I'm not a true crime watcher in and of itself, but I yearn for sorting through evidence, figuring out the answers to questions, logic, receipts, timelines, proof, screenshots, etc. Okay? Therefore, I am a big trial watcher. I've been watching lawtube since 2019 or so. I'm no lawyer. Okay, I'm not giving anybody any legal advice or legal insights. I'm giving you my opinion as an avid lawtube watcher since 2019. I went to the law school of Emily D. Baker, okay? So this is a moderately educated opinion and speculation that you're about to see in this video. But it's from that point of view that I say I think everyone should pay attention to the Karen Read retrial. What is going on in Karen Read's case is not justice for John O'Keefe. Here in April of 2025, we're in a really weird place in America. A lot of our constitutional rights as citizens, as non-citizen residents, are being pushed to the limit by our government, especially by the new administration since the last election. Sometimes our rights and liberties are attacked quickly, out of the blue, in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden, you're taken into a paramilitary ICE van or kept out of the country because of some loophole thing that you didn't know about with your visa, except that you actually are allowed to be in the US and your visa is valid, but the person at the desk is telling you that it's not, even though you know that it is, but you're still not allowed back in the US because they say so. Sometimes it's these quick, sudden sparks that burst into flames of outrage and activism and social media virality. Other times, like in the case of Karen Read, who's been under the eye of the prosecution in Canton, Massachusetts since February of 2022. It's a long, slow burn, a walk over hot coals that keeps getting longer and longer, and the coals keep getting hotter and hotter. And the hope is that someday she will feel the burn so badly that she just gives up, gives in, takes a plea, and allows herself to be taken away to prison, even though she knows, and the evidence, in my opinion, heavily supports that she is an innocent woman. A lot of people who don't have the kind of funds that Karen Read started this process with would have had to give up long ago. A lot of people who didn't have the family support that Karen Read has, who didn't have the house to sell that Karen ended up having to, who did not have their story picked up by social media and become a very hot topic on the internet, even outside of legal circles. Mainstream media has started doing multiple documentaries and interviews and series on TV about this case. And without that fame, she would not have her fellow Americans donating to support her legal needs, and she would not have other lawyers stepping in free of charge to Karen and her current lawyers not charging her anything. They're so dedicated to her innocence that they are now working for her for free. Her team is working for her for free. Her legal fund is just going to hard costs right now. Karen Read, therefore, is a lucky woman to have the support that she has in this process. And she is an exception to the rule. Any of us, you or me, could turn into a Karen Read one day. If, God forbid, we go out for a night of drinking, we go to an after party at somebody's house, we drop off our boyfriend there, something bad happens to him, and we get blamed for it. And why do we get blamed for it? Because the people inside that house, which is probably where something bad happened to our boyfriend, because we are Karen right now, are friendly with the lead investigator who decided from early on not to look into those people, to look into anybody else. And that means us, the outsider, the woman who came and went, the easy target, the scapegoat. Karen Read was nobody famous when her trial started, when she was accused of killing John O'Keefe. She was not an influencer. She was not a celebrity. She was a woman of means, thanks to her career choices, but she was not any particularly influential lady. In my opinion, the police expected her to quickly and easily fold under the weight of heavy charges of murder and manslaughter of her boyfriend, and perhaps take a plea deal so that she didn't have to fight a murder charge. The cops could have someone to lock up. The local news would celebrate them for prosecuting and sentencing and convicting a cop-killing woman. And it would be an easy peasy case blamed on someone who didn't matter and wrapped up in no time. But because of Karen Read and her team's fight, that is not what happened here. And that is what brings us to the ridiculousness of this trial still going on in spring of 2025. I'm hoping I can have this video published by Monday, April 14th. Probably won't happen, but that will be the day before we are expecting the trial itself to start. We're expecting the jury to be finished being selected on Monday, April 14th, and for opening statements of the trial to begin on Tuesday, the 15th. Hello, my darling boy. I'm going to spend this video telling you why I think people should pay attention to this trial. Mainly it's because it should not be happening. This retrial should not be happening. And I'm going to list a bunch of reasons why. I think it is an injustice to Karen Read, and most importantly, an injustice to the victim in this case, John O'Keefe, because Karen Read did not kill John O'Keefe, in my opinion. So that means that the person or people who actually did are gallivanting about free, grateful that somebody else is under the police's watchful eye, which means that the justice system is missing the point of what it is supposed to be doing. And that's the topic where I'd like to start this video, and I will get there in just a moment. Before I do, I know this is a different kind of content for me. I'm passionate about it. I'm talking about it. I hope you stick around. If you don't, that's fine. I have such limited time and energy. I'm just going to talk about things that I think are really important. Quick PSA. I bruised myself recently quite a bit on one of my recent jobs. I work in land surveying. So if you see bruises on my arms, I promise I am not in danger. I was just using a post hole digger to dig and set a monument in a wetland, and it was very, very heavy getting the wet clay out of the ground, and I was using my arms, and I don't actually have a lot of arm strength. So the moral of the story is I'm fine. I am bruised, but I am fine. I do have blisters on my hands, but I am fine. Okay, just to put that at ease. If you end up liking this video and you want to see more Karen Read coverage, let me know in the comments below. Everything you're about to see, again, is my speculation, my opinion as a lawtube watcher, not a lawyer. I am not here to accuse anybody of a crime. I am here to express my opinions on publicly available information. Also, specific resources that I use during this video are going to be listed below in the description. And then in general, I'm going to give shout outs to main channels that I have followed for coverage of this case. I watched the first Karen Read trial going in as a jury member, completely uninformed, to see how it all turned out. I never got the connection point between why the Commonwealth felt that Karen Read was the one who committed this crime. It never lined up to me. I thought she should have been found not guilty. I was shocked that the jury did not do so. We will get there in a minute. Since then, I have been following all of the post-trial 1, pre-trial 2, litigation in between. So I cannot go in as a jury member now, this time around. I'm also not in the position to do like ongoing trial coverage this time around. So I'm not going to get your hopes up that I'm going to be a channel that is able to do that. But I may, we'll see, I may come online every now and then to spout my anger, because I know it's going to be an extremely frustrating trial to watch for people who saw the first trial and saw through the Commonwealth's bullshit. in my opinion. But yeah, if you're here for me talking more about Karen Reed or the Waterbury, Connecticut evil stepmother case, which I made a video about a couple weeks ago, because that's happening right near where I live in my hometown where I grew up, Waterbury. So I'm very deeply connected and curious about that case. I'm paying close attention to it, don't worry. Or if you want to see me spout off about influencers, and I have a couple of different influencer video ideas coming up soon, don't worry. And of course, it always, just about always, has something to do with something not necessarily criminal, but awfully close to being that serious. Then I hope that you subscribe to my channel, set your notifications to all because I post very sporadically. Also, if you want to help this video get seen, please give it a like, give it a comment. If you don't know what to comment, please let me know where you are watching this video from and the date and time when you are watching it, because that kind of stuff is very interesting to me. All right, with all the PSAs out of the way, let's get into why everybody should pay attention to what to me appears to be a travesty of injustice, which is the Karen Reed retrial. And I'm very annoyed, and I'm going to try. I know my channel name says Hannah needs to yell. These days I've been doing it through gritted teeth because I'm filming when people are home and I don't want to bother them. But God, does it infuriate me sometimes. Let's go. Let's start with the basics here. What is the purpose of a criminal trial? To get to the truth. And if I'm looking down a lot for the rest of the video, it's just because I have notes. I wanted to keep this on point and focused. Truth is vital to justice. It is not justice for the wrong person to be punished for a terrible crime. That makes sense, right? We all agree on that. If a defendant stands accused of a crime, the punishment for which requires stripping them of their liberty for some short or long period of time, or even the rest of their whole lifetime, or in some cases stripping them of their life itself, we need to be sure beyond a reasonable doubt that it is true that this defendant committed this crime. That is what the U.S. court system is supposed to be set up for. We all know how it works. A jury of the defendant's peers diligently studies while the prosecution lays out its evidence against the defendant. The defendant's team defends them with their own evidence and or their own interpretation of the prosecution's evidence. And the impartial judge is there to keep everyone in line, ensure the lawyers are following all the rules, like an umpire calling balls and strikes at a baseball game. Then the jury takes the evidence back to their own separate room where they can privately deliberate over it for as long as they need to come to a decision, and then they return to announce whether they believe the prosecution has found the truth and that indeed the defendant is guilty of the crime that they are accused of. Or not. A defendant can be guilty or not guilty, and they are assumed innocent until the moment that the jury reads their verdict. Because that is the point of this, coming to the truth. Only if we decide that it is true that a defendant committed a crime, only then should they be treated as a criminal. But in this case, the case of Karen Reed, it seems that the search for truth has been tossed aside in favor of a search for a scapegoat, a search for an easy answer, a search for a conviction, in my opinion. I'm going to have to keep saying it throughout. Any of us could be John O'Keefe, a guy who went out for a night of celebrating his niece's accomplishments, met some friends at a bar, went to their house, and somehow ended up violently dead. We don't know exactly the violent way in which he died, but it was violent. It was unexpected. It was sudden. John was a young, healthy man, contributing a lot to his community, a Boston police officer, a father figure to his niece and nephew who came into John's care when their mother and father, John's sister and her husband, both unexpectedly, tragically passed away within a year of each other, several years before this happened, when John now unexpectedly, violently, tragically passed away in 2022. John's death was felt in the community. It was unnecessary. It was violent. It was tragic. It was criminal. Because of how random this event looks, it makes me feel like any of us could have this happen. We're living our life. We're having a fun night. All of a sudden, we're dead. In that case, I would want there to be a search for justice. I would want there to be a search for truth. What I would not want is for there to be a focus on the first answer that comes to mind, an easy scapegoat, rather than exploring every option available to figure out who killed me. And along those lines, as I mentioned before, any of us could be Karen Reed, a woman who's in the wrong place at the wrong time, dating the wrong guy, who ended up going to the wrong place, getting killed by somebody. And because we're an outsider, we're blamed for it. I described that whole situation earlier on. Karen Read was already put on trial over this in spring of 2024. The trial was arduous. It was very eventful. It was long. It was kind of crazy, to be honest with you. And I was willing to give a lot more benefit of the doubt to the prosecution and the judge at that time than I am now, because they seemed then to be much more likely to be acting in good faith. I no longer give them that benefit of the doubt. I want to bring you back to when my coverage of this case left off, which was the summer of last year, when reports started coming out that the jury acquitted Karen Read of 2 of the 3 things she was charged of. But because they didn't fill out their forms properly, that verdict was never delivered. And Karen basically was not informed, the judge was not informed that the jury had acquitted her, meaning found her not guilty of 2 of the 3 charges against her, including the murder charge. Since then, over the past almost a year, it has come out that the jury thought they were not allowed to only deliver verdicts on 2 of the 3 charges. They felt that they were supposed to only deliver a verdict if they could deliver a verdict on all 3 charges. And they were stuck on the second charge about whether or not Karen may have accidentally done something that led to John's death. There were a lot of different options about ways that that could have happened and different kind of charges related, and they were debating that very heavily. They could not come to a decision about whether or not there may have been an accidental way that Karen was responsible for John's death. But as far as purposefully murdering him, they said, nah, absolutely not. And as far as the third charge, which was knowingly hitting and running, hitting John with her car, and then leaving him at the scene of the accident. They said, no, that didn't happen either. If she killed him or was in any way responsible for his death, they're saying it was an accident. They were basically talking about what level of accident was it. It hurts to hold my hand like this, Junior. Can you get off my lap? When jurors started reporting to the lawyers on both sides, the prosecution and Karen Read's defense team, that they had come to verdicts on 2 out of the 3 charges, they brought this issue back to Judge Cannoni, who was the judge who had presided over the whole trial. And basically her stance on it was, there are rules. They did not follow the rules. They did not fill out the forms. And nobody objected to me not asking them if they had any individual verdicts out of the 3. So I am not going to order that these charges be dropped. I'm not going to order her acquitted. I'm not going to decide that there was a verdict that may now be being influenced by the jurors being out in the world, being influenced by social media and news coverage of this case, etc. Even though she took what the jurors were saying to be true, that everybody had come to this consensus that no, she did not murder John, and no, she did not knowingly hit and run and leave him at the scene. Judge Beverly Cannoni took that to be true and still said, I'm not going to dismiss these charges. And that seems to be fine because Karen Read's team has been appealing that decision, and Judge Cannoni's decision keeps getting affirmed by those higher courts, so be it, I guess. That being said, though, that is where the prosecutors could have stepped in to change things. That is where their ethics could have shown up. And their search for truth could have arrived rather than their search for a conviction, because they have within their power every ability to drop charges. They could have said, oh, this jury filled out their forms wrong, but they acquitted Karen Read. They found her not guilty of murder and of hitting and running John O'Keefe. Oh, then let's do the right thing. Let's drop these charges against her because obviously they're not well founded. Because if the judge is taking these things to be true, then basically that's a factual finding that the jurors are telling the truth, that they did do this. They did come to this consensus. So as far as I can tell, it's essentially fact that they did acquit her of these 2 charges. So as prosecutors, you shouldn't put somebody in double jeopardy. You shouldn't try them again for charges they've already been acquitted of. If Judge Cannoni felt that she didn't have the power or the will to make those charges go away, the prosecution absolutely could. But they said, no, we're not only going to keep those charges, we're also going to bring in another prosecutor who is going to go above and beyond to prosecute this case like a defense attorney. As badly as Lally did the first time around with that, where he was just grasping at straws to make the state's case make sense, which is kind of what defense attorneys do when they're defending a client who is guilty, and they're just trying to weave together straws into some kind of a rug that looks okay so that it might hold together enough for when the jury steps on it. That's kind of what Lally's presentation of the prosecution case felt like the whole time. I remember saying last time when I was talking about how he was presenting the case that Lally would bring a witness to interview on the stand. He would ask him a bunch of questions. He would say a bunch of things. I would have no idea what was going on. And then the defense would come, and when they were going to cross-examine a witness, before they did the cross-examination, they would like summarize and to clarify the main points of what the witness had even just testified to. They'd be like, so basically you're saying that you think this because that, and then that is what happened, right? And the witness would be like, yeah. And the defense would be like, okay, because Lally couldn't make anything make any sense. And now here comes Hank Brennan to do more of the same with even more grasping at even thinner straws, except he does it with vitriol. Lally did it with a sense of confusion and overwhelm. Hank Brennan does it with bitterness and vitriol. And so that's going to be a real fun dynamic to see come trial. But anyways, the prosecutors could have done their job, looked for truth instead of looked for a conviction, and dropped the charges that Karen Read was apparently acquitted of. And they said, no, we're just going to do it again. We're going to make her go through this again, go through this expense, go through this stress, go through this time. We're going to make the city of Canton, make the state, the government, the taxpayers pay for this trial. The town is in shambles over this case. So many people don't want it to be going on. So many people think that Karen should be free. The prosecution is supposed to be a representation of the people of whatever town, and the people do not want Karen Read to be prosecuted. This just looks like some sort of personal vendetta that I do not understand at this point. Like there's no other way that I can look at this right now, because there's no logic here. And I like logic. Anyway, they could have dropped the charges. They didn't. It looks real fishy. It looks real corrupt. So does the judge's decision. As I mentioned before, she took the jury's statements as being true, that they did acquit Karen Read of those 2 out of the 3 charges. And her decision that basically doesn't matter because they didn't fill out the form right looks real sus, because she took their affidavits, their testimonies as being true, that is in fact what happened, and that is what they decided. It looks sus when a judge says, I believe you that you acquitted Karen Read of these 2 charges, but I am still going to allow her to be tried for them again, and I'm not even going to hold a hearing about it. Thank you for playing. So basically, Karen Read has already been declared innocent of murder, and she's going to go be tried for murder again, is basically what's about to happen, and it's stupid in my mind. But that's not all. Reason number 2 that this is BS. The judge shows a lot of bias. Judge Beverly Cannoni, who I just talked about, and who I said I was showing a lot of benefit of the doubt for with the last trial. I was not going to say that she was necessarily as evil as everybody was making her out to be. But oh my God, within the past year, watching the pretrial motions, I have really come to see what everybody was talking about last year with the last trial. And let me start this next few sections with just a blanket statement that I cannot in this video talk about every single thing that is wrong with this judge, with this prosecution, with this case, with the evidence, yada, yada. Please fill in the blanks in the comments below. I am not intending for this video to include every single detail. It can't. I am one woman doing one video. There is so much here. Fill in the blanks in the comments below. Write your favorite corruption in the comments below. How about that? Okay? Especially if it's one that I don't mention. But I'm going to mention the points that stick out the most to me. So basically, Judge Beverly Cannoni, first of all, allowed the state to put forth a bunch of terrible evidence. Second of all, allowed them to get away with hiding or losing or otherwise misplacing, not turning over a lot of evidence to the defense, to Karen Read's team, until either super late or even in the middle of ongoing trial last year, which was against the rules, and had the defense done that, they would have gotten slapped down for it. The judge is allowing the prosecution to take steps and do things that she would not be allowing the defense to do, especially letting in a lot of evidence very late. That was very important, crucial evidence when it came to the defense being able to prove Karen Read's innocence. In this way, she is essentially appearing to be acting as an arm of the prosecutor in her biased treatment of Karen Read's attorneys in the trial. Not only with letting in a bunch of late evidence and letting the prosecutors put forth some screwball evidence that doesn't make any sense, but also over the past year, she has really been seeming to be trying her damnedest to find a legal reason to get rid of Alan Jackson, one of Karen Reed's lead attorneys, who is from California.
And based on her comments, the fact that he is from out of state seems to be the main reason that Judge Cannoni is allegedly targeting him.
Part of his firm includes Elizabeth Little, so that's 2 out of 3 of Karen's legal team up until recently when Robert Alessi joined the team, and then another woman just joined the legal team who was a juror the last time around. So this is going to be very interesting. I cannot wait to hear more from lawyer Victoria George. I'm absolutely fascinated by this woman. I love her. What a play. What a move. She joined the case by being hired by Yannetti's law firm. Yannetti is the other lead attorney that has been working with Karen this whole entire time. He's from Boston. Victoria George was hired by Yannetti and was working for his law firm now, so she has every right to appear on the case. Yannetti is now doing this whole case pro bono, which makes me think that Victoria George also is. So is Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little at this point. So is Robert Alessi, who just joined. He joined going pro bono from the start because they are all so convinced of Karen Reed's innocence and the injustice going on here. But anyways, the whole entire time, Judge Beverly Cannoni has been condescending and rude and just frankly unfair to Alan Jackson. She has recently blown a couple of things way out of proportion to try to find a reason to get him removed from the case. It didn't work, thankfully, but my God, the excitement in her voice when it felt like she had an opportunity to. I am not going to go into all the details below. I'm trying my best to keep this concise. If one of you wants to write the story of the alleged lie that Alan Jackson told, go for it. But in my opinion, she's really trying to get Alan Jackson removed, which is not even the same as her acting as an arm of the prosecutor, but it's definitely biased toward Karen Reed's attorneys, which is biased toward Karen Reed, because what happens to Karen Reed's attorneys impacts Karen Reed's ability to get justice. Justice works both ways. It works for the victim and it works for the accused. There is no justice for the victim if the wrong person is accused. There is no justice for the accused if they are accused of some shit they did not do. Okay. Anyways, I'm taking way too long and I'm going to try to speed up. Judge Beverly Cannoni also seems to be conflicted and should not be the judge on this case, in my opinion, because she has potential alleged relationships with people who are related to this case. Her brother at one point represented Chris Albert, the brother of one of the people who was in the house in front of which John O'Keefe died. Judge Cannoni's brother represented Chris Albert on a case in court. So that's just a little bit coincidental. It's a little bit weird, a little bit all in the family. And it might make Judge Cannoni a little biased toward the Albert family. Speaking of all in the family, one of the reporters who has been covering this case, the main one who has brought it to light publicly, was texting with
Sean McCabe, the brother-in-law of one of the key witnesses in the case, Jen McCabe.
And in a snarky response to that reporter, called the judge Auntie Bev and said that her beach house is where they were going to bury the reporter's bones or something like that. He obviously does not like this reporter. So it certainly creates at least an appearance that there may be some kind of relationship between Judge Cannoni and some members of this extended family that was at 34 Fairview when John died there. There was already a motion for her to recuse herself as judge because of that Auntie Bev comment. She decided that she was not conflicted though, so it's fine. She got to decide that for herself. Isn't that wild? It's absolutely crazy. Anyway, Judge Cannoni is also taking zero of the obvious opportunities to throw out this obviously convoluted case, one of which was the firing of the lead investigator for this case, Michael Proctor. This happened a month or two ago at this point. Michael Proctor was a huge problem throughout this case, and it has now been found by the powers that be at the police union who fired him through their internal investigation that Proctor did a bad investigation. He showed bias throughout it, and he comported himself and did his job so poorly that he needed to be fired over it. You know how hard it is to get fired from a police union? It rarely happens. It happened to Michael Proctor. And there were findings of fact made in that investigation that Judge Cannoni could have looked at and said, you know what? I, as a reasonable person who is out here on a search for truth, a search for justice, can look at this and say, this investigation was a goddamn mess. It was biased from the start. Based on this evidence, based on these facts that have been presented to me, I'm going to throw out this case. She did not take that opportunity. When Alan Jackson made the motion to dismiss the case, which was largely based on Michael Proctor and his misconduct, deciding that the case was a hit and run and wrapping it all up in 16 hours after only investigating Karen Reed, taking Karen Reed's phone and her car without a warrant, texting disgusting, sexist, ableist things about her to his coworkers at the Massachusetts State Police, and those things trickled down to the Canton Police Office level as well. and texting case details to his high school buddies, like on the day of. Like there's so much that ex-trooper Michael Proctor did wrong in this case. Judge Beverly Cannoni really looked at this case that is based on an investigation so bad that the investigator got fired over how bad it was. And she is saying, yeah, let's go forward with it. Let's just see what happens. Let's see if the jury also thinks that that's how bad this investigation was. It's driving me up a wall. Another moment of clarity that the judge could have had to dismiss this case was the Canton Police Department audit that just got released on April 1st, which was the first day of jury selection for this trial, in which a third party came in to audit the Canton Police Department over the course of like 3 months. I don't love some of the things that are said in that audit. I think they give the Canton Police Department too much benefit of the doubt too many times. But overall, it still makes the Canton Police Department look real bad. It points out the obvious things that they should have done better in this investigation of John O'Keefe's death. So that's a second uninvolved fact-finding committee presenting evidence that this investigation into Karen Read was so bad. And yet, Judge Cannoni is not doing what she can do and sua sponte dismissing the case because it freaking sucks. If she can, and she's looking at this information and saying, not enough proof for me, that shows bias to me, you know? It shows her not to be an objective fact finder on a mission for truth and justice, but instead someone really pulling for the prosecution to make it all make sense at the end of the day, which is not her job. Finally, Judge Cannoni also is showing bias by not allowing continuances of this trial. Both times, both the first trial and the second trial, it was made clear that a continuance was needed, which means postponing the trial. The first time, it was because very shortly before trial, there were like 3,000 or more pages of FBI investigation documents that were dumped onto the prosecution and the defense at the last minute before the trial. Tons of stuff for them to sift through, including a lot of stuff that was exculpatory of Karen Read. They asked the judge for a continuance so that they had time to process the information, and the judge said, nah, I love my schedule and I don't want to change it for you. If that didn't prejudice the defense, I don't know what did, because in the middle of trial, they're still going through all this stuff and trying to make sense of it so that they can present it as evidence while they're in the middle of presenting other evidence. Like it's absolutely insane. It's so much stress for no reason. There's no reason for that other than the judge just saying, I don't wanna. And then this time around, the fact that the judge's rulings from the first case regarding the jury's alleged acquittal of Karen Read, that decision that she made not to acquit her and to let those charges go forward into the retrial is still up on appeal. That's being appealed right now to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's reason for them to postpone the second trial instead of going forward with it and wait until the Supreme Court at least makes the decision on whether or not they're going to hear Karen Read's case and make their own decision on the appeal. But no, here we are. She's gonna go forward and start the trial, it looks like, on Tuesday, April 15th, when the Supreme Court is set to have a hearing and decide what they're gonna do about it by April 25th. And that's insane to me. And all of these things that the judge has done, plus I'm sure a million more that you can put in the comments below, add up to show a picture of a judge who is biased, in my opinion, and who is really pulling for the prosecution, in my opinion, a bit more than judges tend to. And I don't know why, because there are other cases in which Judge Cannoni has shown herself to be very level-headed and very objective, looking at evidence and looking at situations in general. But for this one, she's just, I don't get it. She's just so prosecution friendly in ways that she doesn't have to be unless it's personal to her, which if it is personal to her, she should not be the judge on this case. But anyway, the judge's bias is just one reason that this is BS. Let's talk about the next one. The next and really the main reason that this retrial is BS is because it shouldn't be happening in the first place. And the best way for me to describe this is by saying that the objective evidence in the case against Karen Read does not line up in any way with the subjective evidence. So the objective evidence, meaning the hard data, timestamps, screenshots, receipts, timelines, proof, video, audio, things like that can't really be changed, right? Subjective evidence being things that are based on people's opinions, based on their experiences, based on their memories, based on their interpretations. For a case to be effective, those things need to line up. Those things need to make some goddamn sense. And they just don't. This is another category where like there's so much I could talk about that I simply cannot get through all of it here. I'm going to list some main pieces of evidence that stick out to me, but you're feel free to use my comments section to inform each other about other stuff that I'm not able to talk about. Again, write your favorite corruption below. It's gonna be a good time. Here's just some of the objective evidence, which I stick to because my brain likes things that are concrete. The reports that I mentioned before from the Canton PD audit and the firing of lead investigator, former trooper Michael Proctor. Those reports confirmed biased investigation, terrible work at the crime scene by the Canton Police Department, which means that the evidence that they were able to collect is poorly collected, poorly maintained, poorly recorded, no chain of custody that was written contemporaneously with when everything happened. They did a retroactive chain of custody for some reason. There was all of this missing evidence in video, or they do find some video and then turns out, oh, it's flipped, it's inverted, stuff like that, okay? Speaking of video, evidence was being withheld from the defense all along throughout these trials, throughout the past 3 years. They got video dumped on them during the first trial, and still to I don't want to say to this day, but still till just a few weeks ago, the defense was still receiving video from the police that they should have received way back before the first trial, so that they can prepare their defense, so they can know what evidence is going to be used against them, because they have every right to see the evidence against them so that they can offer their own interpretation of it, or that they can prove it wrong, because there's some times that it's wrong. Videos can be tampered with. Like I said, one of them was reversed. They have cuts in them. There's potential evidence of potential blurring on screen, color changing on screen. I recommend watching some work by Aussie Insider talking about the quality of the videos and how the videos may possibly have been changed in her opinion. And we will never know, because the judge has decided that they don't need to have access to the metadata for the videos. Just having the final export of the video itself is enough for this judge, which is wild to me. Again, bias, but whatever. Another thing that's objective, the medical evidence in this case, looking at the injuries on John O'Keefe's body and the injuries to his brain, which were testified to in the first trial, it does not line up with the Commonwealth's theory that Karen Reed backed into John O'Keefe at 26 miles per hour and hit him with her SUV. It's hard enough that it smashed the taillight of her SUV, but only the taillight, mind you, not any of the surrounding car, and sent John spinning and flying through the air until he landed 15 to 30 feet across the lawn, which is where he hit his head and passed out in the cold and died of hypothermia combined with, blood loss from that injury, brain expansion from that injury, etc. The medical examiner herself agreed that John O'Keefe's injuries were not typical for a pedestrian who was hit by a car. John's main injuries were a laceration on the back of his head, bruising about his face, and gashes on his right arm. Except for his arm, there was no injuries. There was nothing essentially below his neck. There was a tiny bruise on his knee or some shit, but nothing significant that would have been caused by a car. Especially noticeable, there were no injuries, not even bruises, in his torso, in his hips, in his thighs, the region that would have lined up with the tail of the SUV coming toward him and hitting him. And if you do believe the Commonwealth's theory that only his arm was struck by Karen's 7,000-pound SUV going backward at 26 miles an hour, and that is what spun him and flew him across the yard, his arm should be what is shattered into 47 pieces, not the taillight of Karen Reed's SUV. And yet, the gashes on his arm are the only wounds, and they are only flesh deep. They also look a lot like dog bites, animal bites, not tail light scratches. Also, the amount of force that it takes to break a tail, anyway, it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Anyway, all told, John's death was essentially caused by a combination of his head injuries and from hypothermia from being out in the cold for hours. As a blizzard was coming into town, below freezing weather, he was just wearing a light hoodie. He succumbed to both his injuries and the hypothermia. And as for his brain injuries, medically educated commentators like Nurse Kim here on YouTube have said that his brain injuries indicate that John was hit in the head multiple times. And there are some strong theories about how that may have happened based on who was in the house, whose body he was found on the front lawn of, but we're just sticking to the objective evidence right now. That is subjective. More objective evidence that doesn't make any goddamn sense. multiple searches of the area where John O'Keefe's body was found resulted in finding a ton of different things, and that doesn't make any sense. The first search took place when the Canton Police Department came when John O'Keefe was first reported being found in the snow, dying. After John O'Keefe was taken away in the ambulance, they started to search the area. They found a lot of small things, including clear glass pieces, but what they did not find were a bunch of red pieces of taillight. They were able to find some drops of red blood in the snow, which they encapsulated and preserved in some not suspicious, but like laughably incompetent ways. Solo cups and Stop and Shop bags. I just had to say it. But they did not see red pieces of Karen Reed's taillight in the snow. Maybe because it wasn't there. I don't know, but it just seems likely if they saw the little red drops of blood that they would have seen the red pieces of taillight. But I don't know. I might just be crazy. Anyway, after that first search, the crime scene was then left unsecured for almost 12 hours. It was like 10, 11 hours. Anybody could have walked by through the scene, could have taken things, could have left things, could have moved things around, God knows. And then around 5:30 that evening, the CERT team, around 5:30 p.m., this special team came to the scene to look, and they were instructed to look for specifically pieces of red taillight, John's hat, and one of John's shoes, these big objects that should have been found during the first search if they were there at the time. Wouldn't you know it, they did find them there like 10, 11 hours later during that second search. But one has to wonder, how could they have been missed the first time if they were there? Were they there, you think? And if they weren't there the first time, how'd they get there for the second search? There's a lot of questions around that. Also, bless us, praise be, wouldn't you know it, over the following weeks, taillight pieces kept appearing at the crime scene, and the police just happened to keep finding them because they happened to keep driving by the crime scene and just looking, just glancing on their way to work, on their way home from work, on their way to the Stop and Shop to get some groceries. They just drive by Brian Albert's house at 34 Fairview and just take a little peek to see if any more red taillight pieces show up. And wouldn't you know it, there they are, sitting on top of the grass, sitting on top of the snow, easy to just see. How does that keep happening? How do these red taillight pieces just keep appearing on the grass that seem not to be there before? Or if somebody finds a collection of these red taillight pieces 3 days after the death of John O'Keefe, how come they didn't find the other red taillight pieces that somebody else ends up finding like a week later? What's going on? Do these pieces of taillight just keep magically appearing? Who keeps putting them there? There's some real confusion around these searches, if you want to call them that, of the crime scene itself. And it all goes back to it not being secured after the very first search, so that it sure looks like there's an opportunity or an option that things have been tampered with over time. Allegedly, in my opinion. Some other things that really stick out to me as I have been watching this trial and watching the pre-trial motions and everything. The phone data from John O'Keefe's cell phone shows that he was still moving around after Karen Reed left and went to John's home. So that means that she could not have hit him so hard with her SUV that he flew and landed and cracked his head and laid to rest. Also, between the time that Karen got home from 34 Fairview Road and then when she came back in the morning searching for John with Jen McCabe and Carrie Roberts, Karen Reed called John O'Keefe's phone 50-something times. And all of these calls went unanswered. The Commonwealth prosecution team points to this as a negative point against Karen Reed, but considering that most of these calls took place later in the morning, I see it as Karen frantically calling John, trying to find him.
Because if Karen was just trying to feign concern, cover her tracks, deflect attention away from herself, knowing that she was the killer, right, in the state's opinion and theory, then I truly don't believe she would have left so many calls. Like, I think 50 is overkill in terms of trying to cover your tracks as a murderer. And I don't think she would have left the kind of voicemails that she left, which we're about to discuss in a moment.
But hey, that's just my interpretation. Who needs to seek truth when you could seek a scapegoat and a conviction instead? You know? Finally, one of the most important objective pieces of evidence, in my opinion, relates to key cycles from Karen's car. Basically, There are records in your car that record every time you turn the key to turn on the electric part of the car and then turn it a little farther to actually start the motor and ignite an ignition of your car. The first turn to just turn on the electric is the key cycle. A further turn to ignite and start the motor is an ignition cycle. You can have a key cycle without having an ignition cycle. You cannot have an ignition cycle without having that key cycle first. Okay, so you have information in the black box in your car that records every time you start the electric and or go further to start the motor of your car. And then it records how much driving you're doing during the time that that car is on. The key cycle that lines up with Karen Read going at 26 miles per hour that morning is not the key cycle from when she was at 34 Fairview Road. This part of the testimony at trial was very confusing because the person who was giving this testimony was confused himself, Trooper Paul, about what the key cycles were, what they meant. He was explaining it really badly. But basically, if you go backwards in time down the list of key cycles and you compare it to the times that Karen Read's car was moved, you can map backwards and see that the only time relevant to this case that Karen Read's wheels spun at 26 miles per hour was when the tow truck driver was putting her SUV on the tow truck to tow it to the police department when they were towing away her car without a warrant to be allowed to do so. I'm going to play a clip right here that shows what I'm talking about. I'm going to link this video below. Shout out to I Don't Belong Here. That's her channel name. She puts it together in a very concise, digestible way in a video that's like under 10 minutes long about how the key cycles work and how it lined up. But basically, we have on video, security video, the moment that Karen Read's car allegedly went 26 miles per hour in reverse. That's not what happened. Her wheels were spinning in the snow when they were trying to back her SUV up so they could put it on the tow truck. So let's take a look at that.
The car was stuck in the snow. The prosecution's entire case is built on the idea on Trooper Paul's discovery that Karen traveled 60 feet at 24 miles per hour in reverse, and then that the car had this weird steering thing that it did, proving that's the moment of impact. Or proving that's the moment when the tires picked some traction up. And that's why there was the steering wheel jolt when the tow truck driver was trying to get the car onto the tow truck bed.
Because of the Commonwealth's reconstructionist misunderstanding how the key cycles work, probably misunderstanding the path that the SUV itself took that morning. So he couldn't really account for all the different key cycles and line them up. During this key cycle, where was the car? When did it get onto the tow truck? When was it being taken off the tow truck? When was it being driven? All of these different things to line up the key cycles of the car with the actual path of travel of the car that morning. The reconstructionist constructed this whole story that doesn't end up lining up with objective video evidence. Karen Read's car was going in reverse at 26 miles per hour when it was spinning in the snow, not when it was actually being driven. People have tried reconstructing that moment, especially within the past year, as the old trial was getting, maybe retried, maybe not. And then the decision was made to retry and then preparing for the retrial. People have been curious, like, is this even possible to reverse 26 miles an hour for 60 feet and hit somebody? People who have been trying this out can only really push themselves to drive in reverse to like 12 miles an hour, maybe 13, maybe 14 before they're like, this is too scary. I'm about to be out of control of my vehicle. I'm not going to keep testing to get to 24, 25, 26 miles an hour in reverse. And the idea that Karen Read would have driven her SUV in reverse 26 miles an hour, only 60 feet, mind you, around this road that was curving as well. It's not even a straight road.
Especially considering it's a high-end SUV that was brand new at the time that probably had an anti-collision auto-braking system in it that would have stopped her.
Is just so bonkers. It doesn't make any sense. But why do you need objective evidence? Why do you need things that make sense when instead you can rely on subjective evidence? People's opinions, people's experiences, people's interpretations, people's stories, their testimonies, their memories, their motives, because certainly everybody's motives are pure here, right? Except for Karen Read and Michael Proctor, who was found to have bad motives, the lead investigator. bias, Anyway, let's look at that evidence that the Commonwealth is trying to use to explain the objective evidence and try to make it make sense in a way that supports their story, even though it simply does not. The Commonwealth is shielding the nonsensical nature of their objective evidence, meaning the way that it completely does not line up with their theory, by masking that misalignment with subjective evidence that can never be truly proven, such as the following. First of all, they allege problems in Karen Reed and John O'Keefe's relationship. They assert that Karen Reed got jealous because she thought she saw John kiss a friend of his when they were all on vacation to Aruba a few weeks prior to John's death. That is a thing that Karen did think happened. There is evidence of that. However, there is no evidence that that kiss she thought she saw inspired her to want to kill John O'Keefe. In fact, she pursued a different path of reaction because after Aruba, Karen briefly considered leaving the relationship. She briefly considered dating an ATF agent named Brian Higgins. She was texting Brian for a bit and then, in my opinion, found out that he was dumb as a rock, in my opinion. And as Karen Reed's defense team pointed out during trial, she had ghosted Brian about 9 days before John O'Keefe died, which meant about 9 days before John O'Keefe died, she had decided to stay in the relationship with John, try to work things out with John. She was committed to John. So why would she kill him? But of course, Aruba is not the only issue in John and Karen's relationship, according to the state. No. In fact, and lean in, let's see if you can imagine this. On the morning of John's death, he and Karen had apparently been arguing about Karen treating John's niece and nephew too nicely and like giving them Dunkin' Donuts too much. The scandal, the heartbreak. I don't know about you guys, but like, I don't know what I would do if my boyfriend told me I was being too nice to his niece and nephew. I would have to kill him. Yep. And then finally, they hold against Karen some voicemails that she left for John that evening, late on the 28th into the morning of the 29th. After Karen had gone to the bars with John, brought John to 34 Fairview Road, asked him basically to go inside and see if they were invited to the after party or not. And then, according to her, John went inside, kind of seemed to forget that she was out there waiting. And she got pissed because he was not telling her if she was allowed to come inside or not. So she got mad and she left John at 34 Fairview because he's an adult in a house full of adults. And if he needs to figure out how to get home, he's an adult who can do that, right? He's at his friend's house. He should be safe and sound, according, in anybody's mind. She just dropped her boyfriend off at his friend's house. Nothing bad should happen. Once Karen got to John's house, which is where she was headed, she left some angry voicemails on his phone. And in these voicemails, she is upset that he seems to be out partying while she's at home watching his kids. And then over time, it turns into she's worried that he's not home yet because perhaps he left the party and went to go be with some woman because one of his exes lived nearby. These voicemails do not make sense for a murderer to leave for somebody that she knows she just murdered because they don't make her look good. She is very upset in these voicemails, but what they imply is that she was calling to yell at John and then he didn't pick up. So instead she vented into the voicemail what she would have vented into John's ears had he picked up. She was not expecting him to miss every one of these calls, so she left voicemails. If she knew she had just murdered him, she probably would not leave messages that make her look angry and jealous, that make her look suspicious, Anyway, to me, this looks like voicemail messages from a woman who is mad about something that she wants to work out with her boyfriend, not, I just killed you, so I'm going to tell you that I'm here at your house with your kids. Where are you? Come home. It doesn't make any sense. Why does it need to make sense though? It's just so easy to try to convict somebody. Anyway, secondly, the Commonwealth twists Karen Reed's statements into saying something that she did not say. There is no solid objective evidence that Karen said, I hit him, which is the phrase that they love to say that Karen Reed said. On the morning of January 29th, Karen Reed was panicking at the crime scene like I've never seen somebody panic before. She was out of her mind. She was screaming It's honestly really sad and disturbing to witness like audio recordings of how she was. It really makes you feel for her, as you should. And it tells you immediately the mental state of grief and shock and panic that she's in, considering the fact that her boyfriend may be dead, and starting to consider that she may be connected to that. Because several first responders and police from the scene, and Jen McCabe, who had been at 34 Fairview Road the previous night and who had been out searching for John with Karen that morning because she's one of John's neighbors and Karen Reed's friend? Question mark? We'll talk, you'll see what I'm talking about. These first responders and police and Jen McCabe, several of them testified that they allegedly heard Karen Reed walking around and saying, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Exactly 3 times like that. And I just need to say that if a first responder or first responding police heard that admission, they would have immediately treated Karen Reed as a suspect, probably arrested her, or at least detained her to interview her. But they did not. They treated her how they saw her, which was as a hysterical, grieving, panicked woman whose boyfriend was lying dead on the lawn, apparently. And instead of arresting her as a murder suspect, they sent her home with a different neighbor, Carrie Roberts, who had been with her out searching for John that morning. There is no police body cam footage showing Karen Reed saying the phrase, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." There is no audio recording of Karen Reed saying, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." There is also no police report reporting that she said this phrase. So again, there is no police report mentioning that the alleged murderer confessed to the murder right there on the scene of the murder, which is what they're now saying happened. Nothing of the sort was entered into a report until hours later, around 9:30 a.m., Jen McCabe called the police back to 34 Fairview to come interview her after they had already been there to interview her and other people who were at the house. And she was like, "Oh, wait a minute, let me add this to my testimony that I already gave you. I just need to add this thing that I remembered." She told the police when they came back that she had heard Karen saying, "Could I have hit him? I think I might have hit him." These questions, these musings, not, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Somehow that statement has come out of somewhere and evolved over time. When what most people testified to remembering, hi, Junior, what most people testified to remembering Karen saying, including Carrie Roberts, who was also out looking for John that morning with Karen and Jen, was the phrases that I just mentioned. Karen saying things like, "Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Do you think that it was me? Do you think I hit him?" She was wondering, she was musing, she was not confessing anything. If we're going based on subjective evidence, there's a lot more subjective evidence that she did not say, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him," than that she did say it. Another layer of subjective evidence that the Commonwealth is using to cover over how much their objective evidence does not line up with their theory is the residents and guests of 34 Fairview Road, their testimonies, and to be honest, their actions, which I find to be sus AF. And let me just reiterate, I cannot fit everything into this video. It's already longer than I wanted it to be. It is physically not possible. Please fill the comments below with things that I'm leaving out. I'm just giving you the things that are sticking out the most to me. People call the defense's theory of the case a conspiracy theory because they have said in trial that they believe that John O'Keefe left Karen's SUV, went into 34 Fairview Road, and whatever happened to him in there where all those people were drunk as skunks after partying, after being at the bar all night. They don't think that anybody intentionally meant to murder him, but they think that somebody got mad, somebody punched somebody, something got out of hand, and all of a sudden John was dead or dying or very injured or whatever. They didn't know what to do with him. They put him outside on the lawn. The defense aren't saying that they know for sure what happened, other than it was not Karen, and it was inside 34 Fairview because phone data shows him being in that house and going up and down stairs in that house. It feels disrespectful to call it a conspiracy theory at this point because there is data that lines up with John being inside that house. And because of the sus nature of everything that the Alberts and McCabes, the two main families that were at the house, did following the events of John dying. The Commonwealth is trying to line it up as things that suggest that Karen committed these crimes. But when I look at all of this stuff, I just see evidence that the Alberts and McCabes are trying to make it really look like they were not involved, which leads me to believe that maybe they were involved. I don't know. And I don't need to know. It does not bring me any joy to suggest that they were. It doesn't need to be them. It could be some other whole circumstance where John left their house right after Karen drove away. He was looking around. He didn't see her. A coyote ran out of the woods and attacked him and knocked him down and bit his arm. God knows. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know. And then truly nobody saw him. I don't know. But the fact that the only person that was investigated was Karen, when there was a house full of people right there, I have my suspicions, okay? Because that house full of people is a police-connected family. Brian Albert, the patriarch, is a Boston police officer. His brother, Kevin Albert, works at the Canton Police Department. Their brother, Chris Albert, who I mentioned before, is a political figure locally in the area. And again, Judge Beverly Cannoni's brother apparently represented Chris Albert. I don't know. There's a lot of in the family going on and in the police force going on. And then, of course, Brian Higgins, the ATF agent that Karen had a brief texting thing with, was also at the house that night. And he's some kind of a government agent as well. So these are all people who have reasons to protect themselves and their reputations and stay away from being soiled as potential killers of a Boston cop. So that mere status among these people as being police connected is compelling to me as potential motive for them to cover up what may or may not have happened inside their house. My cat is chirping at the birds outside, if you hear that noise. Also, they all testified that John never went into the house, even though there were several witnesses that saw Karen parked in front of 34 Fairview Road, sitting in her car alone, which lines up with her saying that John left the car and went into the house, and she waited for him a little bit. And again, John's phone data indicates that he was moving around in the area of their house, including going up and down three flights of stairs. The fact that he was not wearing a heavy winter jacket when he was found, he was just wearing a light hoodie. So one would think he had a winter jacket at some point. And what better time to take it off than when you're inside a house? And they say he never went into the house, also despite the fact that his injuries are much more indicative of him being in a physical altercation than being hit by a car. We talked about that before. Everyone from 34 Fairview Road also testified that they did not see John laying on the front lawn when they left the home between 1:30 and 2 a.m. That might mean that they were all just too drunk and distracted to see him, or it might mean that he wasn't there to be seen and that Karen did not hit him with her car and leave him there to die in the cold. There is also a ton of suspicious phone information that we have gotten over the course of the last trial and over the past few months in between trials. And really, this should go in the objective data category. But these are a lot of calls, not texts. So we don't have the content of these interactions. We just have the fact that they happened. And the Commonwealth really wants us to believe the subjective testimony about what was contained in these calls and the reasons for them. So I have to put them here in this subjective evidence category. Jen McCabe called John O'Keefe 7 times between 12:29 a.m. and 12:50 a.m. in that midnight hour between January 28th to January 29th. All of these calls went unanswered. Jen says they were butt dials that she doesn't even remember making, but she also deleted these calls from her phone. I wonder, why would she delete these unanswered calls to John? Does she have something to hide about them? I don't know. I just don't know why else you would. Later that night, or, early morning, there was a ton of other phone activity among all of these people who were present at 34 Fairview after they had left 34 Fairview between 1:30 and 2 a.m. and they were at home. A lot of phone stuff going on between 2:20 and 2:30 a.m. Everybody testified that these were all butt dials, including a butt dial that was a 22-second long answered call between Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. There were so many butt dials, including some butt dials that were butt answered and butt hung up and then butt called back. And interestingly enough, none of them resulted in butt voicemails. Just a lot of butt missed calls, except for that answered call and that other answered call that nothing happened in those answered calls. It's just very confusing, and it makes it look suspicious because it's happening at 2:22 in the morning. Among that 2:20 to 2:30 a.m. phone activity is a Google search that the Commonwealth has moved heaven and earth to try to clear Jen McCabe of. If Karen Reed had made this Google search on her phone, she would be in jail right now. But because Jen McCabe made this search on her phone, the Commonwealth is going above and beyond again to make it look not suspicious. According to phone records, at 2:27 a.m. the morning of January 29th, Jen McCabe opened Safari and searched the phrase, "How's long to die in cold?" Assumedly how long to die, but she misspelled it. Later on, she deleted that search. The deletion looks suspicious, But the search itself, whether it had been deleted or not, looks super suspicious considering how John was found, dead in the cold. The Commonwealth got one of their expert witnesses to say that Jen McCabe's Safari search only looked like it happened at 2:27 a.m., but it actually happened around 6 a.m. with Jen using a tab within Safari that had been opened at 2:27 a.m., and that's why it looked like 2:27. Then Karen Reed's team hired an expert who used like 10 different programs to analyze Jen McCabe's phone and the search, including actually using the same version of the same Safari app on the same physical phone, the same version of the iOS that Jen used at the time in 2022 to make the search. This expert, who vetted and cross-vetted and 10 times vetted their analysis of this information around this search, he said that that search did happen at 2:27 a.m. And all I can do is wonder why. And then I think back to, well, Jen deleted that search, didn't she? I wonder why. And I also wonder why the prosecution is working so hard to make this very suspicious looking Google search not look suspicious. Why are they working so hard to protect Jen McCabe? I have to wonder. And there's so much more that I have to wonder about related to this case, but those are the main points that stick out to me the most. Based on everything that I just told you, the jury apparently acquitting Karen Reed already of some of these charges, the judge showing a lot of bias, the objective evidence and subjective evidence that just do not line up with each other, and especially the untrustworthy people, in my opinion, that the subjective evidence is coming from. This retrial should not be going forward. The original trial shouldn't have even gone forward, in my opinion, but now we have enough objective evidence, as it has eventually finally come forward from the Canton police, all of it, to confidently have reason to stop giving the state the benefit of the doubt in this case. To me, it seems that the police, mainly Proctor, had to choose which police officer to rally behind. The dead Boston police officer victim who was lying on the front lawn in the cold with a head injury, or the senior Boston police officer whose lawn that guy died on. To me, it seems they built a blue wall around 34 Fairview Road, or you could say a blue arrow pointing in any other direction, the easiest of which was Karen Reed. The Commonwealth's case against Karen Reed does not make sense, and it never really has. The attorneys who are looking at this evidence and prosecuting this case are typically defense attorneys by trade. Both Adam Lally, the original attorney, and Hank Brennan, who has been brought in for the retrial, they're typically defense attorneys, and they're prosecuting like defense attorneys. They're leaning far too heavily on the subjective evidence, piling up a lot of confusing stuff that seems kind of related to Karen killing John, but when you look at it twice or three times, it doesn't really add up. It just causes doubt. And that's all that surrounds this case, is a ton of doubt and not a lot of hard evidence that what the Commonwealth is saying is true. I would even say no hard evidence that Karen Reed, in a fit of rage and drunkenness at around 12:30 in the morning, backed her car into John O'Keefe at 26 miles per hour and then left him there to die in the cold. There's no evidence of John O'Keefe being hit by a car. His bodily injuries do not reflect it. The car's damage does not reflect it. The way that everybody was acting afterward only lines up with Karen not killing John and the people inside 34 Fairview either doing so or knowing who did so or how it happened. And that's why it feels like this prosecution is really a defense case of the occupants of 34 Fairview Road. And Karen Reed's defense case is really a prosecution of the people inside 34 Fairview Road, Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, Jen McCabe, others who were present and who seem to know a lot more than they're willing to say. At the end of the day, I'm very frustrated that this trial is about to take place. I think it's an obvious miscarriage of justice. And this is why we need to pay attention to this case. We need to call out shit like this when it happens. I have no idea what's going to happen to Karen Reed. I don't know if she's going to be found guilty, not guilty, another mistrial, a hung jury, God knows. I know it's going to be a very different case. It's going to be a much more contentious case than last time because there's been an extra year of burning, building up, tempers flaring between the attorneys themselves, between the judge and the attorneys. Everybody hates each other right now going into this trial. And I hope that they can keep it calm, cool, and professional for the sake of the jury and communicate things much more concisely than I did, much more clearly than I did, and much more clearly and concisely than the first time, so that this jury can confidently acquit Karen Reed of these charges that should not even be brought against her. At least two of them she was already acquitted of. Again, I'd like to remind you, any of us could be John. Any of us could be Karen Reed. This is injustice. This is not a search for truth. This is a search for a conviction. This is a search for a scapegoat. This is a search to deflect attention away from whoever was at 34 Fairview Road at the time, in my opinion, and based on a lot of evidence. And it has to stop. It's obviously unfair. The amount of bias in this case should have had it thrown out. And this is the time when we as the public have to be vigilant, have to watch these things, have to raise our voices about it. So that's why I made this video, because I just needed to express why everybody is up in arms about this case. And if you haven't yet started paying attention to trials, I highly recommend that you do, especially in the current state of the country. You need to know your rights. You need to know what's a good idea to do if you get arrested. If you're going to go to a protest, if you or one of your family members is an immigrant, you need to know some legal basics. I can't even begin to speak about how concerned I am about the US right now. If nothing else, this trial is evidence that there's been reason for concern since long ago, hidden in local police departments, local prosecution offices, local judges who are not celebrities, who are not influencers, not the people that we normally pay attention to their comings and goings and doings, but whose choices have such a huge impact on all of our lives. So if you don't want to become the next John O'Keefe or the next Karen Reed, I recommend that you watch this trial, watch coverage of it if you can't watch the whole trial, and in general, pay attention to our legal system and how it works. And with that being said, you think you can hear it? My voice is done. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much if you made it to this point of this video. It's important to me. Check out the resources that I listed in the description, as well as legal commentary channels. Again, I'm no lawyer. I'm no police. I'm no doctor. I'm just commenting and sharing my opinion as an avid LawTube watcher and as a concerned citizen who has been watching since the beginning of the last trial, how this case has unfolded and evolved over the past year, and who is very concerned about my own rights. I don't live in Massachusetts, but I work in Massachusetts frequently, and I'm very concerned about running into those police. I don't want to feel this concerned. I hope that things turn out properly in this case, and I don't have to anymore. I am wishing all the best for Karen Reed and her team, and I will be watching. Let me know if you are as well. Let me know in the comments also, again, things that you felt really compelled by in terms of evidence that I didn't bring up here. And let me know your comments and thoughts on what I did bring up here. While you're down there commenting, I hope that you like this video, subscribe to my channel, set your notifications to all because I upload sporadically and I don't know when will be the next time that I get a video going. I hope that you are well. I hope that you are safe. If there is anything that you can do for anybody around you, I hope that you do it. If there's anything that I can do, I'm in Connecticut. Reach out to me. I can't guarantee that I can help, but I can guarantee that if I can, I will. Stay safe. Keep each other safe. And with that said, I hope you have an amazing day, week, month, year coming up. And until next time, peace be with you always. Bye.